Considered to be one of the greatest films of all time and currently number 33 on IMDb's top 100 films list, Harakiri is a pivotal film in the samurai genre. Yet, it's also been described as an anti-samurai film. Although it has all of the trappings of the genre, such as kimonos, sword fights, ronin, and a quest for vengeance, it also presents us with a heart-wrenching criticism of Bushido, the samurai code of honor. Released in 1962 and directed by Masaki Kobayashi, Harakiri uses the story of one ronin's final request to deliver a devastating critique on the samurai code of honor, Bushido, and by extension, the systems of power that are used to keep people down. And what better place to talk about Harakiri than Asakusa? Once the beating heart of Edo period culture, Asakusa was a hub of religion, commerce, and entertainment. With the Sensoji Temple towering nearby and the narrow alleyways of Nakamise Street bustling with life, it feels like a place where the past never fully disappeared. If you haven't seen the movie, fair warning, spoilers ahead. Also, discussions of unaliving oneself. Before the Edo period, Japan was locked in a period of bitter civil war for almost 150 years. Various different lords from across the country were fighting each other for power. At that time, the samurai represented an integral fighting force for these lords. It also represented one of the only ways that people could move up a class. You see, if you distinguish yourself in battle, cut off a general's head, you could move into the samurai class, which included an income and greater prestige in society. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of the three great unifiers of Japan, actually was born a peasant.
So what you're saying is...
Put it away, P-chan.
You need to start being nicer.
By the end of the Sengoku period, Tokugawa Ieyasu found himself in control of a unified Japan. He moved the capital to Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo, and ushered in an era of 260 years of peace and prosperity. Now, peace has its advantages. You don't have to worry about somebody cutting your head off, you can do all kinds of art, and you can do all the degenerate things they were doing at the Yoshiwara district. But if you were a samurai, it wasn't great, because now you kind of have an identity crisis. I mean, with no war, and your whole identity is that you're a warrior, what do you do with that? It also made it impossible for anybody to move up in society. Without war, nobody can distinguish themselves as a valuable warrior. In the Tokugawa era, you died in the class that you were born in. This also created a problem with ronin, or masterless samurai. When the Tokugawa came to power, they punished their enemies by taking their fiefs and also sometimes just eliminating the clan. This meant that thousands of samurai were now out of work. Now, back in the day, in the Sengoku period, since it was a constant stream of wars and battles, if you were a ronin, you could just find another clan to work for. But that wasn't going to work in this era of peace. This created a major social problem. We have a bunch of warriors who are very proud and have no income and no work. It actually got so bad at one point, a few groups of ronin tried to overthrow the Tokugawa government. In this new era of peace, the samurai were already becoming a financial burden on their lords because they didn't really need them for wars anymore. So they had no interest hiring these ronin wandering around. Now, the situation eventually resolved itself by the middle of the 17th century. Most of the samurai understood that they were not going to be great warriors and became merchants or farmers instead. As historian Conrad Totman notes, this taming of the samurai became a defining feature of the era. Warrior skills, the prerogative of the samurai class, were unnecessary in a society where violence had been outlawed and where one's position depended on hereditary rank. So samurai largely became government functionaries. Their martial skills, the raison d'être for this privileged class, declined in importance over time. The Tokugawa also established a surveillance state. Spies were everywhere, and daimyo, kind of like the Ii clan, had to maintain residences in Edo so that the government could keep an eye on them. New fortifications couldn't be built, boats couldn't be built, and marriages had to be approved by the government lest two powerful clans create an alliance against the Tokugawa. Major roads had checkpoints, You could only leave your hometown if you were to go on a pilgrimage or official government business, and villagers and townspeople were organized into 5 groups of families who basically had to watch each other and were responsible for each other's actions. I'm starting to understand why the Japanese are all about rules. They had to live with all of this BS for like 260 years. See, I'm Latina. I don't really understand rules. In Spanish-speaking countries, you kind of just do what you can get away with. So, what is harakiri? Well, you may be more familiar with its more commonly used counterpart, seppuku. You see, both words mean to cut open your belly in Japanese. You see, in Japanese, they use kanji, and the word can change depending on the kanji order or whether they use, little hiragana characters in the word. So, there can be multiple words for the same thing, which is what makes learning Japanese so much fun. For the sake of clarity, I'm just going to call the ceremony harakiri because that's the name of the movie. The original title in Japanese is seppuku. I don't know why they translated it differently. It's one of life's mysteries. Harakiri was a practice of ceremonial unaliving where a samurai would, in an effort to regain his honor, or as a punishment, would stab himself with his short sword in the stomach and cut himself open like a fish. Please like and subscribe. Now, as you can imagine, this is a terrible way to die. Maybe not if you're a samurai, but from a medical standpoint, it's the worst because you're not hurting anything vital. You're just slowly bleeding out. I hope this doesn't get censored. That's why you had a second who was a swordsman who would cut off your head to, put you out of your misery. Now, there were different ways to perform the ceremony, but this is the way that it is depicted in the film, and it was also the most common way. Tsugumo Hanshiro, a masterless ronin, arrives at the Ii clan estate and asks permission to perform harakiri in the palace courtyard. The palace steward, Saito, tries to dissuade him by telling the story of Chijiwa Motome, another man who made a similar request not too long ago. Well, Chijiwa was just bluffing, hoping for a small handout like many other ronin had received in similar situations. Instead of just paying him off, the Ii retainers are determined to punish him for his supposed cowardice and make an example of him, forcing him to go through with the ritual. When they discover that his swords were made of bamboo, evidence that he had pawned the real ones, considered the soul of a samurai, they are so disgusted that they make him carry out the ceremony with the bamboo swords. As you can imagine, it didn't end well. So I can't recommend this movie enough, but I have to admit this is probably the worst death scene I have ever seen in a movie. And I mean that as in the most horrifying. I recommend you watch the movie, but if you're squeamish, maybe turn away at this part. You'll know when it's coming. Tsugumo ensures Saito that he has every intention of performing harakiri, but when he requests a second, each man that he requests, 3 in total, are mysteriously out sick that day. Weird that. Tsugumo then goes on to relate his life story. Turns out, Chijiwa was his surrogate son/son-in-law who came to the house looking for a handout so that he could pay for medical care for his sick wife and dying baby. Tsugumo recounts how his body was returned to them and how the 3 samurai mocked Chijiwa's death despite the obviously bad circumstances he was in. They're smug and even laugh about his death. Tsugumo's grandson dies 2 days later, and his daughter, Miho, sick and mad with grief over the loss of her husband and son, dies not long after. Tsugumo goes on a revenge quest, cutting off the top knots of the 3 samurai who conspired to kill Chijiwa. Saito commands the retainers to kill him, but he proves to be too good to be defeated with swords. He is shot down with muskets right after he commits harakiri himself. When asked about the movie, director Masaki Kobayashi said, "All my pictures are concerned with resisting an entrenched authority. That's what harakiri is about. I suppose I've always challenged authority." It seems that every element of the film challenges entrenched power structures, but let's focus now on the most conspicuous symbol of the film, the hollow armor. The film starts with a shot of an empty suit of armor, imposing, ornate, the pride of the Ii clan and a relic of the Sengoku era. Yet like Bushido, it is hollow, nothing more than a fixture to project power. Even the mansion feels hollow. Devoid of furniture, it feels cold, empty, and uninviting. The man that greets Sugumo at the front door has a tiger mural behind him, showing the power and danger of the clan. Behind Chijiwa, we see a tree devoid of leaves. This is symbolic of the values of Bushido, a supposed code of proper conduct for samurai to live by, but is, as Sugumo says, the thing we call samurai honor is ultimately nothing but a facade. We see this with Chijiwa's treatment. As a supposed disgrace to the samurai class, it's not enough to just kill him. They have to humiliate him every step he takes towards his death. Forcing him to commit seppuku with a wooden blade is not only cruel, but also humiliating. The clan, while claiming to uphold the values of Bushido, are really just reinforcing their power by making an example of him. The message that they're sending to the world is clear. Don't challenge the rules of Bushido. But for Chijiwa, to follow the rules to a T is to let his wife and son die. Surely, if the rules are letting people die needlessly, they're unreasonable, right? Sugumo's seemingly sincere request is just a ruse to reveal the clan's hypocrisy. He cuts off the top knots of the supposed 3 best swordsmen in the clan, and yet only one committed harakiri. The other 2 are hiding in their homes, waiting for their top knots to grow back. When faced with death, they turn out to be no better than Chijiwa. Saito doesn't even bother fighting. Throughout the movie, he boasted of the martial prowess of the clan, but they could barely handle one half-starved samurai. In the end, they can't even defeat him with swords. They have to use guns, which were considered less honorable to use. Again, Sugumo's circumstances were not a result of some sort of failure on his part or because he was an incompetent samurai. He lost his status because the Tokugawa abolished the clan of his master, the victim of a system that only seeks to protect those at the top. He asks the retainers in the courtyard, "To those who loathe Chijiwa, what if you found yourself in the same position?" Unfortunately, Saito is right. The world does not bend to sentimental tales. Sugumo is faced with row upon row of retainers staring daggers at him, unmoved by his plight that could one day be theirs if the Tokugawa came after the Ii clan. They are only interested in preserving their own spot in the unjust system, even if it's insecure. In Harakiri, the rules of Bushido weren't made to enforce a code of superior morality, but to keep everyone down. Sugumo is on the mat below Saito and the other retainers, symbolizing his lower status. Yet through his words and actions, he is able to maintain a level of control over the courtyard. If he leaves, he'll be cut down. But by playing by the rules of Bushido, he makes it impossible for Saito to kill him right away. Thus, he is able to tell his story and humiliate the clan. In the duel with Omodaka, we see 3 graves above Sugumo, symbolizing the souls of Chijiwa, Miho, and Kingo, his dead grandson. They symbolize his motivation to avenge their deaths and perhaps are giving him strength from beyond the grave. The naginatas that frame him later on in the film create tension, showing how the threat to his life never really goes away, but only grows stronger. The film takes inspiration from Kodan, a style of traditional Japanese storytelling. Legendary actor Tatsuya Nakadai said in an interview that he drew inspiration for his performance from a Kyogen Mawashi, a kabuki player who narrates the story. This makes sense as he has an audience here, and he is telling the story of his life. There are multiple levels of narration in the film, Sugumo telling the story of his family, full of emotion and defiance, and Saito narrating the whitewashed version in a voiceover, a more common form in cinema, of events in a flat, emotionless manner. My favorite is the lighting in this scene. It's very theatrical and heightens the emotional impact of Chijiwa's death. The spotlight focuses on Miho and Sugumo. At the beginning of the film, there is a diary where the important events of the clan are recorded. When it's time to tell Sugumo's story, Saito whitewashes it. It's written down that Sugumo committed harakiri without incident, his amazing revenge and the tragic loss of his family lost to time. This is another power flex. Sugumo's humiliation of the clan conflicts with the image of their martial prowess. So it didn't happen. Tokugawa rules could be another explanation for why they want to cover this incident up. No clan is really safe, and if word gets out that they can't even control their own home, they could get in serious trouble with the shogunate. In the end, the clan killed Tsugumo, and that means they're the victors and they get to tell the story. And unfortunately, their lie spreads throughout the capital and gains them admiration. Now, you would think that if you have to lie about your ideology, that it's wrong, but keeping up the facade of Bushido is the only way to keep the Bakufu, or the military government, afloat. They need to keep everyone in a constant state of fear in order to maintain their authority. But once the facade cracks and disillusioned people like Tsugumo start coming out of the latticework, the system employs violence. Harakiri was criticized upon its release for its graphic seppuku scene, but the violence in the film is purposeful. It illustrates how power during the Edo period, and in all states, is upheld through violence. The violence in the film is used sparingly, making it much more shocking and impactful when it does appear on screen. The duels run more on tension than action. In the duel with Omodaka, they stay a good distance from each other throughout, each holding out for a good moment to strike. Just as things start getting good, we cut away. We don't even see the fight with the first samurai, instead we see the chase, the anxiety on his face. He doesn't cut away from the Harakiri scene though. We see that in great detail. Kobayashi is trying to resensitize us to the violence typical of these movies. Sure, the duel sequences are cool, but they are meant to highlight the constant threat of violence toward people challenging the system. Neither the daimyo nor the shogunate need to beat everyone into submission. The threat of horrible death is enough. That's why they killed Chijiwa. He challenged the idea of the samurai being holier-than-thou warriors. He was breaking the facade. Though firmly established in the historical and political culture of the Edo period, I would argue that the film is heavily influenced by Japanese experiences during World War II, when Bushido was being used as a propaganda tool to convince the population that sacrificing themselves for the country and the emperor was the most honorable way to die. Bushido regarded surrender as cowardly, so many people were either pressured or convinced to commit suicide rather than surrender. This mentality also affected how POWs were treated, which is to say, badly. During the Battle of Okinawa, one of the last major battles in the Pacific Theater, many Okinawans testified that the Japanese army ordered them to commit suicide. Many others killed themselves and their families, influenced by Japanese propaganda. About 3,800 kamikaze pilots were killed in the war. Their average age was 21 years old. By 1945, Japanese leadership had no reasonable expectation to win the war, and were anticipating a U.S. ground invasion on the home islands. They hoped to make the invasion so difficult that they could negotiate some sort of ceasefire rather than a formal surrender. They planned on committing the entire population to resist the invasion, and in June 1945 launched a propaganda campaign called The Glorious Death of 100 Million People. The main tagline was, "Glorious to die for the Holy Emperor of Japan, and every Japanese man, woman, and child should die for the Emperor when the Allies arrived." Now, it's unlikely that this plan would have been carried out to its final conclusion for a lot of reasons, but it's a testament to how committed they were to this surrender bad narrative that they were willing to kill millions of people and just with the entire population's mind. World War II ended 17 years before the film's release, meaning the Japanese audience would have remembered all of this. Kobayashi, the film's director, was drafted in 1942 and bounced around East Asia until he finally ended up on Miyako Island near Okinawa. He and his regiment resorted to eating grasshoppers and dogs to survive. Grasshoppers were a popular food during the war. By 1945, he ended up in a POW camp. Upon returning home, he found out that his father and brother had both died as a result of the war. So Bushido was not some obsolete ideology from the Edo period, but was used to justify killing millions of people not long before the film's release, including members of Kobayashi's own family. One of the best recent examples in a film about this topic is in Godzilla Minus One. A kamikaze pilot, played by the hot Ryunosuke Kamiki, bails on his suicide mission and returns home to find his house destroyed. His neighbor, played by the radiant Sakura Ando, comes out and berates him, calling him a coward and blaming him for the loss of the war and the deaths of her children. Now, this one dude could not have turned the tide of the war just by crashing his plane into a boat, but that's how deep the propaganda ran. With this context, it's not hard to read Harakiri as an indictment of the Japanese military's conduct during World War II. All of Kobayashi's films are criticisms of entrenched authority in some way. His other famous project, The Human Condition, more directly criticizes the Japanese military during the war, if you want to check that out. It's 9 hours, so have fun. It's not hard to see how Harakiri has remained relevant 60 years after its release. Its stunning cinematography, coupled with a heart-wrenching story attacking entrenched authority, will always remain relevant. That's it for this video. If you're not too bummed out, please like and subscribe. More videos of me talking about Japanese movies on location are on the way. If you have any suggestions for where I should film next or what movies I should talk about, let me know in the comments. Mata ne!